"We're closing your department after 18 years, Carol," Raymond remarked nonchalantly as he leaned back in his leather chair. "Budget cuts, pack up by Wednesday." "I understand completely," he said in a tone as bland as if he were placing an order for lunch. I sat across from him and nodded calmly. He had anticipated tears and fury, so the relief that swept across his face was almost hilarious. Or at least some compromise, but instead I got up, smoothed down my skirt, and left his office with a proud stance. "My name is Carol Jennings, and I've learned patience pays off for almost 20 years at Hollowgate Systems in Seattle, Washington, where I grew the compliance department from a one-person operation to a team of 15. When I started the company, it was small, scrappy, and cutting corners. I put strict procedures in place, trained staff, managed growing budgets, and kept us out of trouble with the law. Together, we were the company's immune system, preventing infections before they could take hold and spread. We helped turn Hollowgate from a regional player into a reputable name and data source." Back at my desk, I opened my drawer and looked at the small voice recorder I'd kept there for 3 years. I pressed stop on today's recording, the last one I would need, then I took out my phone and texted Janine Brooks, our security department's manager, who saved the company millions in potential fines and lawsuits. Raymond Shaw had just fired us with less thought than canceling a magazine subscription. 3 years prior, Raymond had been brought in as part of a management shuffle fresh from a competitor with slicked back hair and NBA buzzwords, and he immediately started pushing for streamlining and efficiency. The head of legal needed to meet Wednesday confidentially, so it's important that she responded right away. My office was at 10 a.m. At first, it was minor things like skipping necessary refresher trainings and rushing approvals without proper review, but to him, compliance was just red tape and unnecessary bureaucracy that stood in the way of greater profits. Later, there were fake signatures on compliance documents, backdated certifications, and orders to disregard established. Raymond never understood that I hadn't dedicated my career to compliance because I loved bureaucracy. Rather, I did it because I'd witnessed what happens when businesses put short-term gains ahead of long-term integrity. When I confronted him, his response was always the same: "Just make it happen, Carol. Nobody gets hurt. Everyone wins." Because I knew that Raymond would eventually make his move against the department, which he saw as nothing more than an obstacle, I meticulously organized and triple-checked every directive to cut corners, every false report, and every potential violation, because sometimes people do get hurt. Growing up in a blue-collar family in Tacoma taught me early on that the world doesn't. My father worked for 40 years at the shipyard before being fired 6 months before his pension would have been paid out. The company restructured, and he never recovered from that betrayal, spending his last years bitter and broken. "They'll smile while stabbing you in the back, Carrie," he told me. "Always keep your eyes open. When I joined Hollowgate Systems in 2006, it was a promising company with good products but loose operations. The founders were brilliant engineers who needed someone to build infrastructure around their innovations, and as the years went by, I became that person. I carried that lesson with me throughout my career. Thomas Miller, the former CEO, recognized the value we brought to the company and fully supported our work. "Carol runs the department that keeps us all employed," and he used to say at company meetings, "When she talks, we listen." The company grew because I hired the right people, developed training programs, and created systems that protected the company and its clients. However, Thomas took a break. The first time I noticed trouble was during a quarterly review meeting in 2021, when Raymond Shaw interrupted my presentation on updated data security requirements. At that time, the new leadership team had different priorities: quarterly results and market share growth at all costs. "These extra steps are killing our." After the meeting, he pulled me aside and said, "Look, I respect what you've built here, but sometimes we need to interpret regulations creatively." He said, "Deployment schedule," without trying to hide his annoyance. "Our competitors aren't doing all this, we need to be more flexible." That night, I bought the voice recorder, and over the next few months, Raymond's inventive interpretations grew more blatant. Ordering teams to ship products before security testing was finished, having my employees fabricate training records for audits, and personally approving compliance certifications without conducting the necessary reviews. Each infraction was added to my expanding file, and I wasn't being spiteful. Rather, I was defending myself and my team in case something went wrong. Raymond would make sure we took the fall. I had witnessed it before my department became the focus of his ire. He repeatedly blocked promotions for my employees, cut our budget, and kept us out of important meetings, but we continued to try our best to uphold standards in the face of mounting pressure. I never imagined that he would fire the entire department. Even Raymond was more audacious than I had imagined. Would dare, but I was ready anyhow. The compliance department was in disarray on Tuesday morning, the day following Raymond's shocking announcement. My team assembled in our conference room, faces showing different stages of shock, anger, and fear. "This is how they treat us," said Vivian, my deputy who had been with me for 12 years, without any warning or transition plan. I asked Thomas, our newest team member, about our ongoing projects and asked him who was handling the ISO certification, which is due next month. I gave them a few minutes to vent before calling the room to order. "I know this is difficult news and it's unfair, but for the time being, we need to concentrate on documenting everything and making sure a clean handover occurs." The team appeared unconvinced, but they trusted me, so we spent the day organizing files, creating process guides, and preparing handover. Vivian asked, "Handover to whom?" with bitterness. "They're scrapping everything we've built." I met her gaze steadily. Throughout it all, I kept my composure, but on the inside, I was going through phases of disbelief, rage, and finally resolve. During lunch, I sneaked away to meet with Philip Johnson from IT Security, who had been a longtime ally and had frequently supported me when I disagreed with Raymond. "I heard what happened," he said. I responded, "Raymond is probably planning to distribute our responsibilities across departments, making it look like everything's covered." Philip shook his head, which is a classic Shaw move that eliminates the expertise and keeps the window dressing in place. As we sat in a cafe across from the office, I said, "It's crazy. The auditors will have a field day when they discover there's no compliance function, assuming they discover it." His eyes widened a little. "Carol, I'm planning to protect this company from Raymond's recklessness." I said, "Will you help?" And he didn't. "Lean forward, Philip. I need a favor. Can you preserve the access logs showing who modified our compliance documentation system over the past 3 years and the backup copies of the original documents? I would waive my right to contest my termination and agree to a non-disclosure clause regarding company operations in exchange for 2 months of severance pay. The amount was insultingly small for someone of my tenure and position, but it was Raymond's final offer. "Please be careful. The logs will be in your email by the end of the day. Shame on you for expecting me to sign away almost 20 years of service for a pittance." I put the unsigned contract in my drawer next to the recorder and planned to bring everything to Janine Brooks, the head of legal, tomorrow. Although we weren't close, she had always treated me professionally, and for the first time since Raymond's announcement, I was aware of her reputation for integrity. Little smile, he believed that Wednesday would be my last day at Hollowgate, but he was mistaken. Wednesday morning came with a somber Seattle rain that matched the atmosphere in our department. Everyone went quietly through their last tasks, pausing occasionally to share contact details or offer encouraging words. I had planned a farewell lunch for later, but first I had my meeting with Janine. I showed up at her office at exactly 10 a.m. with a plain accordion folder, and her assistant nodded me in right away. Janine Brooks was a strong woman in her early 50s with keen eyes who didn't miss anything. Her office was spotless, with family pictures on one wall and law degrees and professional certifications on another, serving as a reminder that Carol, who was both successful and kind, said, "I was sorry to hear about your department. These restructurings are never easy, thank you." She rose to shake my hand and said, "I'm not here to complain about the elimination of my position." Her eyebrows raised slightly, and she asked, "What can I do for you?" Put the folder on her desk. For the past 3 years, under Raymond Shaw's direction, I have been recording systematic compliance violations. What started out as taking shortcuts has turned into potentially criminal violations of data security laws, fraud, and the falsification of regulatory filings. Jannine's expression stayed neutral, but she sat up straighter and said, "Those are serious." I opened the folder containing emails, memos, meeting minutes, and audio recordings that demonstrate Raymond has been purposefully evading compliance requirements and fabricating documentation. I methodically laid out the evidence, including emails in which Raymond specifically instructed staff to omit necessary security protocol recordings. Accusations, they're not allegations, they're documented facts, I said. Of meetings where he ordered backdating of compliance certificates and documentation demonstrating his signature on verification forms for reviews he never conducted. Jennings carefully read over each piece, her scowl growing as she came to the section on client data handling violations. If this is true, we've been deceiving federal clients about our security protocols, which could be illegal. She leaned back and tapped her pen against the desk, confirming that I had included the original requirements, Raymond's instructions to circumvent them, and proof of false certification submitted to clients and regulators. Why bring this to me now, Carol? Why not earlier? It was a reasonable question, and I attempted to address these issues. First, I have records of 7 internal meetings with Raymond in which I voiced concerns. Each time, he dismissed them and put more pressure on my department. When that failed, he started to bar us from project reviews where we could have found violations. I paused, then said, "I was planning to bring this to you next month after the timeframe was expedited by the annual compliance audit and the closure of my department." I understand. You understand that I'll need to confirm everything is arranged by incident with supporting documentation. The flash drive has the audio recordings and extra information, Jennings said, closing the folder and sitting quietly for a while. The question that caught me off guard was, "What do you want from this, Carol?" I had been so focused on exposing Raymond that I hadn't fully considered my own desired outcome. I want the company to address these violations before they cause actual harm to some people. Philip Johnson and IT Security can verify the authenticity of the system logs using electronic evidence. I met her gaze steadily and said, "I want Raymond Shaw held accountable for putting Hollowgate at risk to further his own career. That's all? You're not seeking reinstatement or compensation?" I shook my head, saying, "This isn't about my job, it's about doing what's right." Jennings studied me for a long time, and I'll need to bring this up with the CEO. As I got up to leave, she said, "Carol, please don't discuss this with anyone else for the time being. Thank you for bringing it to us instead of outside authorities. Can you be available tomorrow morning?" "I'll make myself available." After nodding, I departed with a peculiar sense of relief and excitement that the wheels were turning. I had spent the afternoon with my colleagues at We Met at Bailey's, a restaurant close to the office that had hosted numerous department celebrations over the years. The owner recognized us and offered a private room at no additional cost. A small gesture that almost broke my composure as we shared memories and tried to focus on their concerns rather than my meeting with Jennings. I raised my glass of iced tea and said, "I want to thank all of you." I felt a twinge of guilt because these people had trusted me and followed my lead, and now their careers were in limbo. Even if my evidence led to action against Raymond, it wouldn't automatically restore their jobs. The work we've done has been important, even if it wasn't always grateful. I'm proud of what we did together, and I know that each of you will succeed somewhere else. Without your leadership, Carol, things wouldn't be the same. You taught us that integrity matters, even when it's inconvenient, especially when I corrected gently and the group laughed. After lunch, I went back to as I was collecting the last of my personal belongings and heading to the office to finish emptying my desk. Raymond showed up in my doorway and said, "Everything ready to depart, Carol? I'll need your badge and company phone before you leave," he said too pleasantly. I gave them to him without making any remarks, and his smile wavered a little at my cool obedience. "Listen, I realize this as I've always respected your thoroughness, but business decisions aren't personal. The condescension in his voice made me shudder, but I remained professional. Of course, Raymond nodded, seemingly content that I was accepting my fate without question. Did you have a chance to look over the severance agreement? I did. Neutrally, and I'll have my answer by tomorrow. His eyes narrowed a little, so I guess my tone alerted him. The terms are standard, Carol, and I wouldn't advise dragging this out. Thank you for your concern, I said, closing my box of belongings, and I'll be in touch. As I passed him on my way to the elevator, I could feel his eyes following me. I had just arrived at my car when my phone buzzed with a text from Philip, who you should know accessed compliance systems after hours last night. It looked like he was changing documentation, all changes logged per your request, and for the first time, there was uncertainty in his expression. I let him wonder. My heart raced. I wrote back, "Thank you. Can you secure those logs immediately?" Unexpectedly, but not surprisingly, Raymond was hiding his traces without realizing we had saved the original records. His actions simply enhanced our case against him. Already done. Sent to your personal email with encryption key phrase. It is yours, was his prompt reply. Favorite quote from our initial encounter. I grinned as I recalled telling Philip, in accordance, when we first started working together 8 years ago, we're not the party police, we're the ones who make sure everyone gets home safely after the party. That evening, Janine, the CEO, sent me another message in which she evaluated preliminary evidence. As I was getting ready for bed, I received a final text from Raymond himself, Carol. Let's meet for coffee tomorrow at 8 a.m. We need to talk over your transition package and whether it can be improved. An emergency board meeting has been scheduled for tomorrow at 9 a.m. Your presence is desired at 11 a.m. Align. He was becoming anxious. Maybe he had learned that I had met with Janine, or perhaps he was simply attempting to keep me quiet. In any case, his timing was telling. I texted him back, unfortunately, I'm not available at 8. He responded right away, dinner then, my treat. Sorry, prior commitment. We'll call you tomorrow afternoon, and I turned off my phone. Waiting for his response tomorrow would be enough. To witness Raymond Shaw's meticulously crafted facade come apart Thursday morning. I dressed especially well, wearing a charcoal suit that I saved for significant presentations, mother-owned pearl earrings, and a silk scarf in Hollowgate's signature. Blue. If this were to be my last appearance at the company, I would present myself with at 10:30 a.m. Dignity, Janine, called to let me know that the board was ready for you. Could you please go straight to the executive conference room on the 12th floor? I'm already in the building and will be right up. I had arrived early, sitting quietly in the lobby cafe so I could watch the comings and goings. At 8:30, I noticed Raymond arrive at 7:45, looking unusually unkempt. As I rode the elevator to the 12th floor, I took deep breaths to calm my racing heart because this wasn't about vengeance but rather about accountability. By 9:15, 2 board members had entered together, their expressions grim, and the entire executive team had hurried in without stopping for their usual coffee. The executive conference room was imposing from floor to ceiling. As I walked in, I saw a huge polished walnut table with windows overlooking the Seattle skyline, 12 solemn faces turned toward me, and Raymond sitting at the far end with a pale face next to Gerald Winters, the CEO, whose normally friendly expression had changed to one of something much more serious. Thank you for joining us, Miss Jennings, said Eleanor Richardson, the board chairwoman. Please take a seat. We've spent the morning reviewing the evidence you provided to Miss Brooks, Eleanor added, and we've also heard Mr. Shaw's response to these allegations. Gerald leaned forward before we continued. Just to be clear, we're treating this matter with the utmost care. Raymond refused to look at me in the empty chair directly across from him. In all seriousness, the board has approved a comprehensive independent investigation. I nodded while maintaining a neutral expression, and I appreciate that. Eleanor stated that we now need to know why you gathered this evidence over a 3-year period without informing the board or other authorities. It was a reasonable question. But also Athi were defensive and worried about their own liability, so I brought up these concerns through the appropriate channels. At first, I responded coolly, and I have records of several attempts to speak with Mr. Shaw directly about compliance violations. When that didn't work, I started to document the issues more thoroughly, which doesn't explain why you waited 3 years. I pressed one of the because I had faith in this company and wanted to settle the problems internally. I told the board members that I was constructing a case that couldn't be written off as a miscommunication or a difference of opinion. And to be honest, I hoped Mr. Shaw would change his mind before it became necessary to take this action. Raymond finally spoke up, and it was obvious that this was retaliatory because Carol was upset about losing her position, and Janine actually cut me off when she said, "The first documented incident in Miss Jennings' evidence predates any discussion of department elimination by nearly 3 years, and the electronic logs confirm the timeline." Eleanor said, "Miss Jennings, given what we've learned, we'd like to discuss your continued relationship with Hollowgate." I respectfully and steadily met her gaze, "Chairwoman. My concern is not for my job, but rather for the company's integrity and the potential harm these violations could cause to clients." Gerald interrupted, saying, "We think it would be beneficial for everyone if you would think about coming back to assist us in addressing these." The door opened before I could reply, and a man in a sharp suit came in, nodding to Eleanor. "This is Mr. Atkins from our outside counsel," she said, explaining that he would be joining us due to possible legal ramifications. Mr. Atkins took his seat, and Raymond stood up suddenly. "This is ridiculous. I've built this company's market position over the past 5 years while compliance has been 1 week after my meeting with the board." I sat in Gerald Winter's office going over the results of the investigation. "Mr. Shaw," Eleanor said sharply, "your future with this company is very much in question at this moment." I watched as Raymond's face came to terms with the fact that this was not a meeting to manage a problem employee but rather the beginning of his downfall. The findings of an independent investigation were even more damning than my evidence had indicated. Raymond's violations went beyond my department and affected financial reporting and client contracts for product development, and the board has fired Raymond with immediate effect. Gerald told me that we have also self-reported the pertinent violations to regulatory bodies, contacted the impacted clients, and I nodded with a sense of relief rather than victory. "That's the responsible approach, and we'd like you to lead our newly expanded compliance and ethics division." Gerald went on to offer me a seat on the executive committee, more authority, and direct reporting to the board. It was everything I could have ever wanted in a career, but we're offering positions to all 15 members with increased responsibilities and appropriate compensation adjustments, he assured me, after I hesitated. "What about my team?" "The board recognizes now that eliminating compliance was short-sighted." "That's putting it mildly," I noticed, and Gerald managed to look embarrassed. "I apologize for not paying more attention to the issues you brought up over the years." I carefully considered his offer. The simple solution would have been to accept it and go back to the job I had established and carry on working, but something had fundamentally changed. "I appreciate the offer, Gerald, but I need time to think it over. The last week has been illuminating for me." As I left his office, I noticed that 3 executives who had previously avoided eye contact with me now grinned and nodded in greeting, indicating that the word had spread quickly. I checked my phone and discovered 3 missed calls from executive recruiters, as well as a text from Vivian. They looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, the offer is still open." As the elevator doors opened to the lobby, I realized I was too. 6 months later, I stood before the audience at the National Compliance Officers Conference in Dallas, giving my keynote address, "Ethical Guardianship in the Age of Acceleration." I was happy to share the big news that my team was already moving forward, with or without Hollowgate. The applause was satisfying, but more significant were the nodding heads of professionals who understood the everyday challenges of upholding standards in environments focused on compliance. I had drawn a capacity crowd and concluded that compliance isn't just about rules and regulations but about creating a culture where doing the right thing isn't exceptional but rather expected, and integrity isn't a department but a shared value. Speed and profit later. At the reception, a young woman came up to me and said, "Miss Jennings, your story has been an inspiration to many of us, the way you stood up for principles even at personal risk." Thank you. I was moved by her sincerity. But keep in mind that documentation without action is just recording. The hardest part is knowing when to act on it. After turning down Gerald's offer at Hollowgate, I started Jennings Integrity Advisors, which helps businesses create strong, ethical frameworks rather than just compliance checkboxes. We already had clients in 4 states and a waiting list of others. What you've gathered, she nodded earnestly. I'd love to learn more about your new consulting practice. Unexpectedly, Hollowgate had grown to be our largest client. Gerald had engaged us to completely revamp their compliance culture, and my old team was working as internal partners on the change. Raymond, on the other hand, had not fared well. The regulatory investigations brought on by Hollowgate's self-disclosure had uncovered similar trends at his prior employers, and he was certified as a justice often comes at its own pace, but it does come. My new life hadn't been planned, but somehow it felt right to use my experience to help others avoid the mistakes I'd witnessed firsthand and the lessons I learned during my 18 years at Hollowgate. His security professional status had been revoked, and he was now potentially facing civil penalties. Had developed into the cornerstone for assisting other organizations in creating cultures of integrity rather than merely compliance. Every business I recommended was one where leaders recognized that taking shortcuts would ultimately result in longer, more expensive paths, and where employees could perform their jobs without sacrificing their morals.